We will start with Mr. Lloyd, please. 6 minutes. And just let me preface, we can go till 10 to 6. I'm not sure how long we want to go, but it's going to be up to the committee. We may have to shorten the second round, to meet that deadline. But anyway, go ahead, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming to all of the witnesses. I'm going to start with Deputy Commissioner Brian Larkin. We had the pleasure, across party lines, of touring the RCMP lab here in Ottawa recently, hosted by yourself and others. And at that lab, your staff told me that they already extensively work with manufacturers to determine, they work with manufacturers when working on what firearms will come into Canada. Is that the case?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Lloyd, that is the case. We do work extensively with manufacturers, but the Canadian Firearms Program also does a fair bit of research independent of the manufacturers.
There seems to be an assertion that's being made that manufacturers are deliberately exploiting some nebulous loopholes in order to import and distribute firearms in Canada. Can manufacturers legally import and distribute firearms in Canada without the approval of the RCMP and classification?
Sorry, if you allow me, Mr. Chair, to support my colleague on this question. So the way it functions right now is, and I don't want to say it if it's a loophole or not, I'll just explain the process. If the gun that is manufactured in Canada is non-restricted and deemed to be non-restricted by the manufacturer, they don't require to verify with the RCMP to verify the classification itself. So it is sold as non-restricted. What we heard from stakeholders is in some instances, these non-restricted, due to the complex classification, could be actually restricted, but it's sold in the market, and by the time the RCMP gets it, measure it, it's a very detailed process, as you probably saw when you had your visit.
Has this happened?
I don't have the numbers. I don't know. I'll refer to the RCMP. I just wanted to explain the process of the gap.
I actually don't have the numbers of how often this has happened, but I can say that since 2020, we have seen a significant increase of records or firearms in the industry that have not received an FRT number. And in doing that, can I back up a little bit to give a little bit of an explanation around verifiers?
Well,
no,
it seems to me, I do have limited time, but it seems to me that a manufacturer wouldn't want to be liable by importing a restricted firearm and saying it's a non-restricted firearm. Wouldn't the manufacturer be liable if they were importing firearms that were explicitly restricted or prohibited firearms, claiming that they're non-restricted?
So businesses and most of them are verifiers, and they do use the criminal code to identify the classification of firearms. Where the problem comes in is there's varying degrees of regulations that have now been put in place that the businesses may not be aware of. So when they deem a firearm to be non-restricted because of the barrel length, or they don't recognize that there's another OIC or there's a regulation.
Now this is all very interesting from a technical, but what we're here to determine is how can we make our streets safer? Is there any evidence that these firearms that maybe are somewhat vague in their classification that have come to Canada, are these being used in crimes? Do you have any evidence that these firearms have been, like that this is being exploited by criminals to bring these firearms into Canada for criminal use?
Those stats.
Okay. My next question, we've set this, the original amendment set that the muzzle velocity over 10,000 would be a new definition standard for an illegal firearm. That would be automatically banned by the definition. Now, this would include a very small amount of firearms, many of which are very expensive antique firearms used for hunting big game. In fact, the cost of ammunition for such a firearm is in the hundreds of dollars for a single box of ammunition. Do you have any evidence that these particular firearms that have been used for hunting purposes have been used to commit crimes in Canada that would justify their inclusion on this list?
Mr. Chair, through you, we don't have any evidence. We do not have that information.
Okay, so it's interesting. So it seems like it's not actually an objective decision based on evidence that this is a threat to public safety, that this is causing fatalities, or this is being used by crime. It seems like the decision to include this specific classification in the definition is purely based on subjective values on, we do not believe these firearms should be in Canada, but we don't have any objective evidence that they actually have posed a threat to Canadians. In terms of airsoft, it was also very interesting. I know I only have a little bit of time. It's not, most varieties of airsoft guns cannot really be converted into real firearms. Is that correct? Like the vast majority of airsoft guns, it would be very prohibitive for anyone to convert those into a real firearm. Is that correct?
There is a capacity, and especially when we talk about ghost guns, about using some components to use the airsoft, but also for the airsoft, just to be clear, what we heard from stakeholders is the concern as well from the police officers, because when they are identical.
Perhaps a ban on certain components rather than trying to ban an entire sport would be a better path forward to preventing this very, very rare occurrence from happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. I'd like to remind all members that our witnesses are here today in a nonpartisan, non-political manner, and they can't give opinions about things beyond that. They can't. They're not here to defend government policy, but to explain it.